this morning. This session is hosted by the Federation of Small Businesses and the UK Cyber Resilience Centre, and this is something that's very close to both of our hearts and something that we think is of real value to businesses, whether you're large or small. Cybercrime is definitely something that needs to be on your agenda. So we've put together this session with expert support to sort of help make you think about it, how you can build that into your business disaster recovery plans, measures that you could be taking, and sort of signposting where you can get further information. So we've got Nick Bell with us, who's a detective superintendent. We've got Michael Preston, who's a serving detective inspector. We've got Hinesh Mehta, who is a serving police detective inspector, and Phil Blunden from the Cyber Industry Engagement and Communications Lead from the MOD. So some really great panelists. So we've got a jam-packed agenda. So without further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Nick Bell.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. I'm going to cover a few things today. I'll just briefly touch upon my background and where I currently work. I've been a career detective pretty much for the last 27 years. I currently work for the NPCC National Cybercrime Program. And the National Cybercrime Program exists. It's a small team that deliver projects which underpin the UK's policing and response to cybercrime. Prior to that, I was with the Southeast Regional Organised Crime Unit, where I was head of cybercrime, digital forensics, and economic crime. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to just cover three things primarily today. I'm going to cover the threats and challenges that policing face in relation to cybercrime. I'm going to cover the UK law enforcement response. What does that look like, the policing response? And just really a brief history of what we call Team Cyber UK, which is, it's quite a cheesy title, but that's what we call the policing response in relation to cybercrime for the UK. And then into the Cyber Resilience Network and how we really deliver and aim to support SMEs and supply chain. Next slide, please. Right, we face a significant range of threats and challenges. In relation to the threat, 1.7 million computer misuse crimes recorded by the British Crime Survey of, the English and Wales Crime Survey for 2020. So 1.7 million reported crimes, but only 30,000 of those were reported to action fraud. So there's a massive underreporting. So what we don't see is a really good view of what the threat picture is and what the true harm really is. 5.9 million businesses in the UK, these are government figures, but and with that 99% are SMEs. So a massive, what we call pretty much a vulnerable sector, which is being left behind through austerity and for a number of reasons, which I'll go into. But just under half of all businesses have reported a cyber breach or attack within the last year. And, it's absolutely identified as one of the biggest criminal threats to business, the economy, and a tier 1 threat. So, the UK's position as one of the, the leading nations in relation to technology and the use of the web, that increases the attack surface. So that creates a significant challenge. The criminals, we often talk about, criminals being one step ahead of policing and in relation to cybercrime, what you do see is you see organized crime groups, nation states, either supported or state actors, where you can buy high harm tools which are readily available on the internet for relatively low cost, or you can buy significant skill sets to deliver cybercrime attacks. So, the criminals, as we change pace and keep up with the criminals, we have this constantly evolving threat as we move forward. Cybercrime, it was probably more so historically, but absolutely seen as a victimless crime. And I've put on there ransomware. Bit like location. That is the significant threat across all sectors at this point in time. It accounts for a huge amount of crime, very, very high harm, very hard to protect and investigate, often carried out by individuals or organized crime groups within different jurisdictions. So it makes it a very challenging area of crime to investigate, but really high harm to the business sector. And then just in relation to SMEs and the supply chain, what we often see is challenges in probably three main areas. SMEs often lack the technical understanding to protect the business. Certainly cybersecurity can be cost prohibitive, but ultimately, where do you start? Where's a trusted starting point to enter the market to protect yourself? And that's what the Cyber Resilience Centre is, and that's the reason why policing has entered that space. Could I have the next slide, please? Team Cyber UK. So if you think about a pyramid structure with the National Crime Agency, National Cybercrime Unit, work alongside the National Cyber Security Centre and the policing response in that sort of tiered response. So at the national level, we have the national agencies working together in conjunction with what we have a tasking system, which is a top-down tasking system. So for all crimes reported, we have one tasking system that will come down via the National Crime Agency. And then it'll go into the various regions we see on the map. So we'll have 9 regions, and with every region, we have a cybercrime unit, which operate at a really good and technical level alongside digital forensics units. And then within every force, we have a cybercrime unit. So I suppose if you went back to 2017, the WannaCry incident, obviously, the law enforcement response was, it was a real challenge. But there's been a significant shift in relation to policing since then, where we have now implemented a cybercrime unit within every force across England and Wales, within every region, and we'll have national. So should that occur again in the future, we have the ability to deploy teams across the country to respond to any threat. And we respond to the threats in 4 main areas. We have a pursue response, which is the investigative response, a prepare, which is that capability development and future training skills development, a prevent section, which is the prevent response is in relation to engaging with individuals to prevent them becoming involved in cybercrime, and then the protect network. And certainly the Cyber Resilience Centres are very much a recognized arm of the protect network, which is about building up that resilience. Next slide, please. So the program objectives for the Cyber Resilience Centres. So I was brought into this National Cybercrime Programme to lead on the Cyber Resilience Centre programme. I'm National Policing Director for the Cyber Resilience Centres, and it was my role to establish a Cyber Resilience Centre in every region in England and Wales, which what we have established. All the centres are not for profit, private academic partnerships to provide that solution for SMEs, bridging the gap between what local police can provide in relation to protect advice and those larger cybersecurity companies. But consistency, delivering NCSC guidance, products and services to get that consistency of the message. Accessible, a trusted starting point, and for affordable services. And we do work with the best emerging student talent to deliver cyber resilience services. On the next slide, please. Just going back one. Next one is in relation to Cyber Resilience Centre. So what does a Cyber Resilience Centre look like? So the resource, and we have the actual boards, those with responsibility for the company itself, senior police, assistant chief constables, PCCs working on the boards. But this is truly a collaborative approach where we have steering groups, founding partners, management boards, which are made up of police, private sector and academia, which work collectively to grow these centres. We'll have a centre in every region, independently led, with this partnership, it's very much to extend the reach and support the SME community supply chains. All the centres have advisory groups. So we have on the advisory groups, absolutely FSB, Chamber of Commerce, cyber clusters, significant regional partners, so we get the tone and the message right. We have trusted partners that deliver cyber essentials, and a number of the centres are developing cyber expert groups where we work with CISOs from significant regional companies to improve that threat response in relation to the regions. All of the centres are pretty much an identical model where they provide a range of products and services from free core membership to other membership options, and they supply student services, which I'll go into next. The next slide, please. So we have this tripartite relationship with academia. We work with the best ethical hacking students, the students doing the best cyber security degrees, cherry pick the best students from the best universities. We have a cadre of just short of 100 students who are mentored, supported, trained, and then supported in the delivery of cyber resilience services, a range of services which I'll let my colleagues go into. But this is very much a social responsibility piece to improve the talent pipeline and the skill shortage in policing within this area. Really, really beneficial for the students, pay them for the delivery of these services, and they get the benefit of work alongside policing, as well as working with skilled practitioners delivering services to the SME community. The private sector, absolutely key from our perspective, to engage with the private sector so we understand the needs of the business community, which it's a real challenge for policing. So we're changing that policing perspective and, as I say, a true collaboration. From the law enforcement response, by policing being involved in and leading on the daily running of these centres, what we do deliver is we believe we'll have that trusted brand we've always had, been good at crime prevention and entering this space as that trusted brand to bring together this collaborative partnership to support the SME community. And from the SME community, what it does, it gives them that trusted starting point of where to go as an entry point to seek support, advice, and take them on that journey to improve the cyber resilience. Next slide, please. Who we helping? SMEs, micros that fall under the radar. It's often businesses that we see have never entered the market before until they become a victim or in a response to an incident. And then we can take them through that journey through the cyber resilience centers on a journey through referral to through our partners, but really trying to develop reach to deliver that message on behalf of the NCSC and other partners to improve resilience. And we do see that every single improvement we can make will raise that level of resilience. Next, please. This map just gives you an idea of where we are. We have a center in every region. We are currently just in negotiation to grow the Northwest Centre, which covers Greater Manchester, into the Northwest region, and we're currently engaging with London to launch the London Centre, which should be around about a turn at the end of this year, and that will give us coverage across every region and every force in England and Wales. As I say, I've touched upon our student services program. We're looking for a ministerial launch. We're launching a national company, which I'll go into in a short while. And we're looking for a ministerial launch, probably October time, maybe November time, on the national company, the network, as well as a launch of the Welsh Centre with the Welsh Government. And we're now seeing a number of the centres picking up and being nominated for a range of awards in relation to cyber security and resilience. Next, please. So next steps, I've covered London. So the national company, as we engaged and established the management boards for the centres over the past year, we had nationals, multinationals coming forward and wishing to work alongside policing at a national level for their corporate social responsibility strategies, but really to improve and support their supply chains. And you know, it's recognised that organised crime groups will specifically target supply chains into the nationals and multinationals, and that's where the vulnerabilities lie. But the whole purpose is to work collectively to support and improve the resilience across various sectors, but allowing national organizations and business to work in that strategic relationship with policing and business, so collectively we can improve and tackle cybercrime. But also the whole purpose is we can then improve the sustainability and support to the regional centres, which is absolutely key. So we're expecting the company to be launched in October. I'm the interim chief exec of that company, and then once we go live, I'll be transferring across to being the chief exec. And we're certainly encouraging organisations that wish to be involved at a national level to support the programme to come forward as well. Next slide, please. Just from me, last couple of things, key messages. Consistent messaging is absolutely key. We provide consistent advice, and often, we're pushing forward the NCSE advice. It's an unregulated market, a very, very confused sector, so that consistent messaging is key. Policing bring that trusted brand. We are not for profit, so business can have complete confidence in that message and support they receive. And we do see the centres as being that go-to centre within every region, as well as nationally for trusted support, advice, guidance, and affordable services. And last slide, please, with my contact details. If anyone wants to contact me, please do. And thank you for listening.
So thank you, Nick. Sorry, my camera seems to have stopped working. There was loads of really good tidbits in there, and one thing that I just wanted to pick up on was you mentioned cyber essentials. So that is something that we very much did within our company. So we did the IASME certification, which is Information Assurance for Small to Medium Enterprises. And then we also did Cyber Essentials alongside it. So I would highly recommend checking out the Cyber Resilience Centres and also have a look at things like Cyber Essentials and how that could possibly be done within your business, because the questions that it asks you are things like, do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you do cyber training? Do you do GDPR training? Do you have an incident log? All of these things that you probably don't think about day to day until it happens to you. So highly recommend that. To just answer one of the questions that's popped up in the chat, this is being recorded and you will be able to pick it up from the FSB webinars on demand website. So in terms of cyber from a small business point of view, it's vital to the economy that we're all using digital properly. And as businesses grow, they're going to be using a lot more of these tools within the pandemic, which means it's opening the doors to businesses to actually be attacked by cyber criminals. And it's becoming more and more apparent. So criminals are expanding their activities, they're diversifying, so you can be hacked in all sorts of different ways through ransomware, clicking on links, your website being attacked, and all of which you might not have thought of until it actually happens to you. So I think small businesses need to take advantage of some of these pathways that we're suggesting to you in this presentation. So definitely make a note to check back on this. But in terms of a few stats, which might sort of might make your eyes water, there's over 65,000 attempts every day to try and hack a small business. And if you want to really scare yourself, there's a website called Digital Attack Map where you can see everything that's happening in real time. But of those 65,000 attempts, over 4,500 of these are successful. So that is quite a high number. So that means on average, one small business is being hacked successfully every 19 seconds, and you may not even be aware of it. This might be things that are sitting in the background. From your point of view, email, website, everything looks like it's running okay, but actually you've been compromised. So I hope that you can get some really good info out of the panelists today. Please do pop your questions in the Q&A and we'll hope to pick some of those up at the end. But I will now hand over to Mike Preston.
Good, thank you, Holly. I'd just like to check if the screen's right. Yes, I can see my screen up there. Thank you. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Mike Preston. I'm a Detective Inspector from Gwent Police and I'm seconded to the Cyber Resilience Centre for Wales. I'm here today to talk about cybercrime, cyber resilience, and in particular, ransomware. So if we have the next slide, please. Okay, as you can see on the screen there, and as Nick has just alluded to, cybercrime attacks against businesses are on the increase. A poll conducted by UK government showed that 46% of small businesses were victims of a cyber attack within the past 12 months. And that is, we're seeing a year-on-year increase. The previous year there were 38%, and this year is 46%. It is on the increase. And even more worryingly, over a quarter of those people who said they were victims of attack had actually experienced 5 attacks or more in the past 12 months. Now, in monetary terms, the average cost of each attack is £8,000. So this really is affecting business in the UK. And the majority of attacks that we've seen actually had a people element. And what I mean by that is it's not technically difficult. Criminals are targeting personal weaknesses. They're encouraging people to click on phishing links, or they're exploiting weak passwords. And a lot of these instances could be prevented if good cyber resilience regimes were put in place. Next slide, please. Okay, so ransomware. Ransomware is something that is a big problem for UK businesses. And if you trade in the UK, it is vitally important that you have a plan of how you would respond to ransomware. as you can see on the screen there, Mike Tyson once famously said in 1996, before his fight with Evander Holyfield, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Now, he said that flippantly to a reporter who was asking him about Holyfield being a good strategic fighter, having a plan. They had the fight. Holyfield did have a good plan because he knocked Tyson out in the 11th round. So it shows the importance of having a game plan and figuring out what you're going to do when things get tough. Now, I'll go into it in more detail on the further slides, but if you remember one thing from my presentation today, please have a backup. Plan for ransomware attacks and have a backup regime. Okay, next slide, please. Now, when we think about cyber attacks and ransomware attacks, a lot of the headlines focus on things that are happening abroad, the Colonial pipeline attack, SolarWinds, etc. But actually, we begin to see more and more reports of ransomware attacks affecting prominent companies here in the UK. I've got some headlines up on the screen there. About a month or so ago, the 5 high schools on Anglesey were actually subject to a ransomware attack. A few months before that, we had the Irish Health Service was the victim of 2 ransomware attacks where large demands were placed on them to pay to get their systems up and running again. Had a massive impact on their health service over there, cancelled their operations, etc. You see to the right there's a headline about the TalkTalk hacker Daniel Kelly, who is actually from Wales, who studied at Welsh University, was able to cause some severe disruption to not just TalkTalk, but to some NHS services where he was utilising their networks at the time also. And the bottom headline there, blockchains, cryptocurrency, once considered to be super secure, we're now beginning to see those being attacked and held to ransomware as well. And as you can see, as I highlighted on the screen, a lot of those attacks could have been prevented if basic security practices and cyber resilience measures have been put into place. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you're sitting there now, you're a small business, you might think, why me? Why would a ransomware attacker come after me? Well, the first answer to that question is money. Ransomware and cybercrime are big business. The FBI released figures a few months back showing that last year, ransomware generated £2.7 billion worth of revenue to criminal groups, and business email compromise attacks generated £1.3 billion worth of revenue to those same crime groups too. It is big business. And so why would they target you as a small business? Well, quite often criminals don't necessarily target individuals. They're scanning the internet looking for vulnerabilities. And if you've got something that isn't covered, they will exploit you. They don't care if you're big, small, massive. They don't care if you're a charity. If there's a vulnerability there, they will exploit it. And second of all, some criminals who are looking to target large organizations might identify you as a supply chain, as part of the supply chain for a large business, and they might use you as bait. They might exploit your company and your weaknesses there to perhaps take over your email account and to send invoices, etc., to a larger company with the bank details changed. And the bottom point there, we're seeing statistics that 60% of small businesses who suffer a cyber attack close for good within 6 months of it happening. So if you think about the statistic I mentioned earlier, about 48% of businesses have been affected by a cyber attack. Well, over half of those that are affected actually close down within 6 months. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is ransomware? I mean, you've probably seen this term in the press and people talking about it. Well, ransomware is actually a combination of 2 words, a ransom and malicious software. And as you can see on the screen there, we probably watch movies or we've seen things in the press where ransoms are depicted. And it's basically where somebody takes something or someone and demands a ransom or demands an exchange of something, usually money for its release. And the malicious software then is computer programs or software which are designed by skilled individuals which can damage computer or steal data that's held on it. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does it actually work then? Because again, you see the stories and you might think to yourself, well, how does it actually get onto computer systems? Well, there are several stages, and the first one you see on the screen there, campaign. Now, this is where the hackers are looking for a way into your organization. They could be looking at your business on social media. They could be looking at yourself on social media, seeing if they can glean personal information about you to perhaps guess your passwords, or maybe see who your business connections are so they could pretend to be you. They might also try a couple of phishing campaigns against you, sending you malicious emails, pretending to be from proper companies and asking you to click on links. And they're probing and exploiting your vulnerabilities there. So the campaign stage is finding out how they can compromise your system. The second stage then is the infection, where they actually send something onto your network, either by way of a phishing email, or if privileges have been granted to them, they actually deposit their malicious software into your system. So it's there. The next stage then is called staging. So once the software is within your network or system, it sort of finds itself further into the system, then escalates its privileges, gets itself into a position where it can make changes and access sensitive data. The next stage is scanning, where it looks through your network and your files to find anything of value. The following one then is the encryption, where they actually lock it down so that you can't access it anymore. And the final stage is where they issue you as a company with a demand. And they'll usually say, your network is locked, your system is locked, pay us X amount of Bitcoin, e-currency, whatever, in order to get your information back. Okay, next slide, please. So as I touched on earlier, ransomware is big business. There's a lot of money being made by criminals by using ransomware. And these criminals, they're organized crime groups, they actually run ransomware models like a business. And there are three main models that these businesses use in. The first one is the complete cradle to grave business, where a hacker or a criminal writes their own code, their own malicious software. They do the campaign stage and look for vulnerabilities. They deploy it to your system. They lock down your data, and then they issue the demand. They do it all from top to bottom in one organization. The advantage to that for them is that they manage to keep all of the money that you pay. The downside is that it's potentially easier to identify those groups and perhaps look for opportunities to bring them to justice. So the second business model that some criminals use is outsourcing tasks to affiliate groups. So if you can imagine where you watch movies like Ocean's 11, etc., they usually get the brains of the outfit and they bring in specialists, the guy who can crack a safe, the guy who can drive them away, the getaway driver, etc. This is similar to the business model that ransomware as a service operatives use. So you'll have somebody who writes code, but they outsource generally the campaign stage to other crime groups. So they've got the ransomware ready to deploy, and they use other criminal groups to test your vulnerabilities, to target you through phishing. And once they've got a way in, the ransomware group will deploy their ransomware through those means. And a third operating model that we sometimes see is selling ransomware to other criminal groups. So you've got the code writers, the people who write the ransomware, and they sell that as a product to other crime groups for them to use as they see fit, or for them to alter so they can use it in other ways too. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about one ransomware crime group known as Darkseid. Darkseid have been the mastermind behind some of the recent big ransomware attacks we've seen in America. So what do we know about Darkseid then? Well, they've got a global reach, but they're believed to originate from Eastern Europe and a lot of connections to Russia and Russian-speaking criminals. They are part of the ransomware as a service organized crime group, which I touched on earlier. And so that means they write the code, but they look for somebody else to do the campaign stage for them. And on the screen there, you can see an example of an advertisement they placed via the dark web, looking for people to team up with to deploy ransomware. And you can see there, they're looking for people who are Russian speaking. And they claim that an average payout that can come from a ransomware attack that they propagate is in the tune of £400,000. They even go as far to list who they're not looking for, anyone who might be connected to law enforcement, English-speaking personalities, etc. And at the bottom there, you can see the range of skills they're listing there. They can attack systems using those operating systems. Okay, next slide, please. So who are Darkseid targeted? Well, probably the most prominent one you've seen in the press is the Colonial pipeline attack. And there's reports going around that they issued a £90 million ransom demand, which was paid to them. There are recent reports suggesting that the American authorities are after Darkseid, and Darkseid is saying they're going to close down. But I'd be wary about believing that, and even if they do, there's nothing to suggest they won't prop up someone else using a different name. It's very difficult to find out the identities of other Darkseid targets because obviously the reputational damage is attached to their attacks. But as well as placing ransomware demands on people, Darkseid were populating a spreadsheet of their victims and publicly releasing those. Next slide, please. So this is an example of something that's freely available on the internet that's reported in the press. And you can see that between August of last year and April of this year, there were 91 organizations that were attacked by Darkseid alone, and they're just one of many ransomware groups. Next slide, please. Okay, so yes, I'm based in Wales, the CRC for Wales, and we have seen a recent ransomware attack here. I can't go into specific details because of reputational risk, etc. But we had an incident where there's an organization based here in Wales who fairly recently changed their managed service providers, their IT providers. They went from one company to the other who was looking after their IT security. And over that handover period, there was a holiday period where the business shut down across all their sites too. A member of management went into the office over that shutdown period. They tried to log onto their machine and they were faced with a screen that you can see on the screen in front of you now. There's no internet connection. Probably many of us have seen that before where there's a problem with your router, etc. So the manager goes into work and he sees there's no internet connection. So what does he do? He calls the manager and he calls the managed service provider. Next slide, please. So the owners of the firm are called, they sent out their IT guys, they managed to log in from an admin account, and when they do, their screen displays the following message: your network has been locked, you need to pay $2 million in order to get your stuff back. Imagine what's going through people's minds when you see that. Next screen, please. Okay, so when they drilled down into what happened, they found that during the period of one IT provider and another one coming in, somebody missed an update that was required on their sort of antivirus software. So there was a patch that was missed. It was identified that a patch needed to be updated. There was a bit of a lack of communication between the two providers who was going to do it, and I left a vulnerability. And in that small window there, someone was managed to exploit that vulnerability and install malicious software. Now, we don't know how it got in. The chances are it's going to be through something like a phishing email, where somebody's clicked on the link, brute force, where maybe a password has been guessed, or social engineering, where the criminals have researched the people involved in an organization. Unfortunately for that organization, they had no recent backup available. And it goes back to what I said right at the start of this presentation. Please, please make sure you've got a backup of your data. So because they didn't have a backup available, demand was placed on them. The organization had a decision to make. Do they pay or don't they pay? Now, when they sought assistance from their IT providers, it was very much structured towards you need to pay this to get your stuff back. They reached out to the police force, the local police force, who gave them an alternative view of, if you pay this, do you know where the money is going? It usually goes to fund other channels of crime. So the company made a brave decision not to pay the ransomware, and they've slowly managed to build themselves back up to where they were pre-attack. Next page, please. Okay, so what are the consequences of this attack then? I mean, everybody focuses on the money and what it's going to cost. But actually, speaking to those business owners, the amount of stress that was caused to them and their families was absolutely phenomenal. They had big decisions to make, a workforce they had to look after, people who relied on them, took up a lot of their time. There were implications with the Information Commissioner's Office if you're holding customers' data, etc. Ramifications for their customers, they had to contact the customers to let them know their data had been sort of breached and potentially exploited. Problems around their suppliers. As you might have read, there are issues at the moment with global supply chains, particularly with raw materials. And if a supplier gets the wind of the fact that you might be not so financially secure, there's a danger they may decide not to supply you if there's any worries about your ability to pay any invoices, etc. Concerns around intellectual property. If there were plans or whatever held on a system, they could find a way to the dark web, and then people could steal your IP and make your products elsewhere. And then obviously, last but not least, the big reputational risk to your organization as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so how can you stop this type of thing happening to you? How can you stop being a victim of ransomware? I've said it twice already. I'll say it a third time with no apologies. Make sure you have a backup. Make sure you back up your data. And more than that, make sure you test your backup process as well. Things might be going well today, but check things while things are going well. The worst time you could really test if your backup works is when everything's gone. So have a backup and make sure it works regularly too. The second step is make sure you protect with antivirus. And in particular, make sure you install any updates. It goes far to turn the auto updates on as well to make sure you are covered. Make sure you're using strong passwords, ones that aren't easy to guess. If you want any advice on how to structure a password, visit our websites and look at the National Cybersecurity Centre for the best types of passwords to use. I recommend also consider using a password manager. Make sure you're au fait with phishing emails, what they look like, things to spot when you get emails, unsolicited ones especially, and consider doing some awareness training for yourself and your staff so people don't get caught out. I've had 2 calls this week alone from organizations who've had cyber attacks, which have been traced back to phishing emails, links that have been clicked on. Look after your devices as well. Physically store them away, make sure you know where they are, but also be careful when you go to places like coffee shops, cafes, and you're using people's Wi-Fi's. Just make sure you're connecting to the correct connection. And the last tip I'd like to give you is join your local Cyber Resilience Centre. If you're in Wales, sign up with us on our website. If you're in West Mids, the team over there will look after you just as well too. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we offer the Cyber Resilience Centres? Well, the biggest thing we'd like to talk to you about is our free core membership. It costs you nothing, and there's no sort of there's nothing placed on you. It's just basically us trying to reach out to you with easy to follow cyber resilience guidance. If you're a larger organization, you want some more tailored support, there are 3 tiers of paid membership, which you can find on our website. If you take our core membership, the benefits of that is we send you a welcome pack with some guidance, some free tools for you to have a look at. And also we'll send you a monthly newsletter where we talk to you about trends that we're seeing and some tips about keeping yourself safe. And if anybody's interested in maybe taking a further step on the cyber resilience journey, ask us about our student services. As Nick touched on earlier, we've recruited top talent from Welsh universities and in the West Midlands area as well. And they can offer services around open source intelligence, vulnerability assessments, policy reviews, and security awareness training. And if anybody needs any bespoke industry type support, come and talk to us as well, because each centre has a panel of trusted partners that we can recommend to you as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so up on the screen there, you'll see some useful addresses, and hopefully this the slide deck will be shared later on. There's our web address at the top there, Action Fraud, and I encourage anybody to report any instance to Action Fraud. NCSC, where you can find all of our guidance. A site there that gives you some tips and some tools around ransomware, and the bottom email address there is for our local organised crime unit in South Wales. And the final slide, please. So these are my details up on the screen there. There's the web address for the Welsh CRC, and my contact details. Please jot them down. Get in touch if you want any more guidance or any other problems you want to share, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name's Hinesh from the West Midlands Cyber Resilience Centre. So you've just heard quite a bit from Mike there, and I'm Mike's equivalent over in the West Midlands. So just a little bit about me. I've been in law enforcement now for about 18, 19 years. I've always sort of done things around technology because prior to joining, I was a software developer. So I always had an interest in technology and how it can help improve policing. I ended up starting the first DMR unit within the West Midlands Police Force, and that was all around how can we use technology to try and investigate crime. And that's things like social media usage, looking at phone use, and actually became a really good tool to try and tackle some really serious crime. That interest stayed with me. And then, as Mr. Bell discussed earlier, the setup of the regional cybercrime centres, I joined the unit there. So I'm here to really 2 hats on. Number 1, to talk about the cyber resilience centres and what we're doing. I also talk a little bit more about cybercrime and its impact upon business. Next slide, please. So just a few things I'll be talking about today, which is probably going to expand upon what you've already heard today. I'll talk a little bit about an introduction about cybercrime and why we're here today. I'll talk about what law enforcement are doing. I'll then go into a couple of attacks. Some of it you've already heard about today, but I'll be expanding upon a little bit more information on some of those attack types. Now, let me go to introduce the West Midlands Cyber Resilience Centre and some of the fantastic work that we are doing over here. So next slide, please. Brilliant, thank you. So you can see some stats there on the screen about the impact on cybercrime. The first one, quite a stark number, really, £400 million per day. That's the digital economy, and that's how much it brings into the UK. 80% of cyber attacks start in the supply chain. £130 billion is lost to consumers annually. You can see those numbers are big numbers. You can see why government is taking this really seriously, why we're here today, or why we want to try and help business. Government has sought fit to say that cybercrime is a tier 1 national security threat. That's the same level as counterterrorism and war. So again, with those numbers, government say we really need to try and take this more seriously. We need to do more work around this. And the last line there about law enforcement needing to work in partnership. We absolutely do need to work with other people. And the whole point of the Cyber Resilience Centre is to work with our experts in the private sector, tying them together with the public sector to try and make sure businesses are much more secure. And why do we do this? If you look at cybercrime in itself, it's a really big problem. You've heard about some of the numbers bandied around with ransomware. Well, if you think about as a police service, why can't we do this on our own? It's simply not a problem that we can arrest our way out of. We have to work together with more people. We have to be talking to businesses much more. And hence why this partnership with the FSB is really crucial to us trying to deliver this message out there. And if you look at the problem in terms of traditional law enforcement and other areas that we might be working with, we have two big problems. The first one is sheer volume of cybercrime. If I'd asked everybody here to sort of put their hand up to say who's been victim of a phishing attack, I'm sure everybody would put their hand up and say at least one time you've had an email purporting to be from FedEx, PayPal, HMRC, etc., and each one of those is an individual cybercrime. So the volume of it makes it really hard for us to investigate in a traditional way. And the second bit is all around jurisdiction. Where do a lot of these attackers come from? They come from countries that probably aren't as friendly with the UK as we would like. And therefore, when we try to take those law enforcement tactics, when we try to arrest people, it becomes a really difficult challenge. Hence why we have to work together to try and solve this problem. Next slide, please. So the next few bits, I just want to talk about actual cyber attacks and really how you can try and help yourself around them. The first one I want to talk about is malware developers. So what are they and what do they do? So malware developers are, in essence, they are coders. They'll be sitting there in their rooms or as part of a bigger group, trying to find exploits and hacks to try and take money and information from you. Okay, that's what they do. And there's been a significant rise over them for the last few years, and some of the tools that now have make this a lot easier than it was previously. So let's look at a small business now. Many businesses will have their own websites, right? They are a really good tool to have to sell your products, to sell your services, to talk and engage with people, right? And you can see the line that says that websites are a gateway. They are a gateway, they're a window to your business, okay? On top of that, they represent an excellent return on investment. Okay, for a relatively small fee, you can have a window to the world. Anybody across the world can have a look at your shop, whatever you're doing, and gain interest. And they're also a really good way to try and capture data from people in terms of who's interested in your products. Can you then get some data and speak to them later on? Can you get some data and then sell them services? Whatever it might be, websites are a really good tool. Now, looking at those bullet points there, if I flip it on its head and look at it from the perspective of a malware developer, each one of those points still stands. So the first point, websites are a gateway. Well, they absolutely are. In the same way that it offers access to customers, it offers access to customers for criminals. It also represents an excellent return on investment for them, because for a very small cost, when they want to push out some of their malware, they can do that en masse. They don't just take it from one website to one person. They can suddenly have access to thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. And the last bit there about data capture. Well, actually, they can start capturing data that they shouldn't have access to. They can then use that data to commit further attacks or they can use it to steal money directly from that person. So actually, when you look at malware developers, they're very clever, they're very savvy, and actually the same way that we all use websites to try and promote our business, they will use it to try and steal money from you. Next slide, please. So what are the common problems that we've found in terms of small business and cybercriminality? Well, one of the first things we see is that people have not assigned responsibility to, whether it's a small business, a medium business, and sometimes even large businesses actually, who has overall responsibility for cyber security. In a lot of businesses, they'll only have, let's say, 10 or so people. Someone might be in charge of using the IT system, somebody might be the MD, or whose responsibility is it in that case? Is it the IT managers? These are the people who are putting systems into your workplace to enable people to communicate and to conduct business, but actually security implicit within what they're doing. And that leads on nicely to the next bit about security awareness training. Once you've assigned responsibility, do those people know what their roles are, what their responsibilities are? They know what the threats are that exist out there. More importantly, the next point is, are they asking the right questions from people? A lot of people nowadays are using service providers, managed service providers to supply them with IT, with infrastructure. Are businesses asking the right questions? I'm not sure they are. Are they asking to see what certifications these businesses have? Are they asking to see what insurance they might have? These are all really important questions because, as like most things, if you don't ask for something, you won't necessarily get it. And that's where we are with some small businesses. They don't know what they're asking for or what they're looking for. And that creates a really dangerous mixture and creates a vulnerability there that we're trying to support. The next slide, please. Great, so I want to talk a little bit now about ransomware, and you've heard a great deal about it from Mike in terms of what it is and some of the risks around it. And I make no apologies for talking about this again, because I can't understate the importance of ransomware. It's on the increase. It's been on the increase for the last few years. They are changing, the criminals behind this are changing their MO. They've changed the way they're operating, actually now to try and threaten the release of data, rather than just asking for money and the deletion of your data, that they're going to release your data instead. It's a real problem. And in my role in the police, I see this coming about every couple of weeks, and a small business falling prey to this. It's a real problem. And every company I've spoken to says, oh, I didn't even consider it, hadn't even thought about it. I've heard about it in the press, but I didn't think it was going to affect me. Well, it does, and it is a real big problem. And I just wanted to highlight that by showing you this this screenshot here. So this is a screenshot that was used on a piece of ransomware called WannaCry, and it was used on the NHS, and it spread like wildfire at the time. And I'll just talk you through what it actually says. So it says, oops, your files have been encrypted. So what does that mean? Mike talked about this earlier, where what you've got is ransomware is a piece of software that will sit silently on your computer. It's probably downloaded inadvertently, perhaps via a phishing email, and it will sit there silently in your computer, starting to lock down files, or what's known as encrypt them. Therefore, you can only access those files if you pay a certain fee to them. So if you look at the text to what it says that, oops, your files are encrypted. And it goes on to say you only have, you can decrypt some of your files for free. Try now by clicking here. If you want to decrypt all your files, you will need to pay. You only have 3 days to split the payment. After that, the price will be doubled. What they're doing here is adding a bit of urgency bias, making you really panic. Also, if you don't pay in 7 days, you won't be able to recover your files at all. They say we even have free events for users who are so poor they can't pay. How nice they are. And then gives you some instruction about how to pay. And it says payment is accepted in Bitcoin only. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, which they believe to be anonymous. And for more information about Bitcoin, click here. It gives you the address to send it through to. And it says once the payment is checked, you can start decrypting your files immediately. And it says contact. If you need our assistance, send a message by clicking here. Many of these organizations have fully fledged customer service departments, and that's the scale of business that we're speaking about today. And not quite on this one, but there was another strain of ransomware that was around a few years ago called Dan Crab. And this was ransomware as a service, and Mike spoke about that earlier. But they were making so much money from this that after a while, they actually went onto a dark web forum and said to people, we're going to shut down our business. And the reason for that was they couldn't launder the money quick enough. They had more than enough money to retire 10 times over. They're making $2.5 million per week. So they said, sorry, guys, we need to shut down completely. And they removed their services from the dark web. And the reason why I point that out is just to show you the sheer scale of criminality, the sheer scale of how much money these people are making and the incentive it gives them to target you as a small business. But that was slightly different to the WannaCry attack. That wasn't done on this basis, but it had a massive impact. If we go to next slide, please. So this was in 2017, so a few years old now, but it was really a watershed moment for government and people really in terms of what ransomware, what is. So you can see some stats there. 53% of UK NHS trusts were affected. 1,200 pieces of diagnostic equipment were infected, 19,000 cancelled appointments, right? So again, this is in 2017. I dread to think what would happen at the time of COVID when the NHS was under pressure. There was estimated to be a £92 million cost to the NHS as part of that. And the FBI actually analysed the language that sat behind WannaCry, and they did a load of work behind this and discovered that actually it was created by a group based out of North Korea. And there's a load of dispute over who actually caused it and why they caused it, but ultimately this was a state-sponsored ransomware attack. Of course, that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable because it was a state-sponsored issue, but actually now those same tools that it had in 2017 that belonged to government agency are in the hands of just normal people now. This is a threat that exists out there. So next slide, please. So we've told you a lot about what's going on out there, some of the problems. And of course, we want to help and support you through this. So Mr. Bell explained earlier what the Cyber Resilience Centre is and what it's for. But again, you can see some detail there as to what the purpose of the CRCs is. And if I put it into just really basic terms, we're here to help small and medium businesses, right? And the reason for that is because over time, cybercrime has crept up on small business. In the same way that it's crept up on many of the areas, it's also crept up on SMEs. Businesses who have never thought themselves to be traditional technology companies have become them without them even realizing. And the example I always give is of, let's say you're driving down a high street and you'll see a cake shop, right? So on the outside, don't appear to have anything to do with technology, and perhaps even on the inside, they don't consider themselves to be a technology company because they make cakes. However, if you have a look at what they're actually doing, what are they doing? Well, firstly, they're probably going to be accepting payment by credit card, okay? So they have to obey the PCI DSS standards. They'll probably have a website to the work that they're doing, okay? And we've spoke already about the attacks that can happen on websites. They may well have a social media presence, and that then opens up a whole new area of people hacking into your social media. They may well have CCTV inside their shop. Again, all these are avenues for criminals to attack people. And criminals know this. They know that big companies are far harder to target than small businesses because they just don't have the resources. They won't have the standing army of IT people. They won't have the resources to try and get the consultancy firm to come and help them when the wheels go off. But from a criminal's perspective, actually data is the same, whether it's in a small business or it's in a large business. The quality of that data, the actual value of that data is the same. So who would I rather target? The big business that is well protected, or the small business that perhaps doesn't have the same level of knowledge? And that's the whole reason why the CRCs are created, is to help small business. Next slide, please. So one of the big things I want to talk about, and I know Mike's covered this, but it's all around free core membership, okay? This for me is an absolute no-brainer. If you're a small business in our region or in Wales, please sign up. It takes 2 minutes to sign up. Send us your details, we can even do it for you. And what you get is access to these things. You get access to some excellent NCSC guidance, the National Cybersecurity Centre guidance. These are the best experts in the UK telling you how to stay safe from cybercrime. You'll have access to a toolkit with some actual practical examples about how you can stay safe. There's also an exercising tool, Exercise in a Box. And this is a scenario which you can run through as a business to try and see where your vulnerabilities may be. It's far better to find out those now than wait until later on. You get a free business consultation, so you'll be able to sit down with some of sort of my equivalent within the centre and talk about your personal setup. How do you currently sit? Because actually, just by sitting down and talking to someone for 5 minutes, that may help you realise where your vulnerabilities are. And you get access to regular news. So please sign up for that free core membership. Next slide, please. So we've spoken about Cyber Essentials, but again, I really can't emphasise how important this is. It's a government-backed scheme. It gives you a really good benchmark as to where you are as a business and where you can go forwards. And again, just speak to anybody across one of the CRCs. We will put you in touch with some really good people who can help you navigate the Cyber Essentials certification process. That brings me to the sort of end of my presentation. If you put the next slide on, please. Next slide again, please. Yep. So thank you for listening to me. If you've got any questions, please I'll put that into the Q&A box, and I'll now pass you over to the next speaker. But thank you very much for your time.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Phil Blunden. I work for the Ministry of Defence, and specifically I'm in the cyber security supply chain team. I'm going to tell you today about our cybersecurity model and what that means for the supply chain, and how that ties in very well with the cyber resilience centres. So on to the next slide, please. So sort of basic agenda is why are we doing this? What is it we're doing? And how does this relate to the cyber resilience centres? On to the next slide, please. So starting with the National Cyber Security Strategy and how we got there and what's going on. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is my bad cyber slide. I was going to skip over this, but I'm actually changed my mind. I'm going to give a little bit more detail. So the first image there just refers to a report about state-sponsored military group that was hacking into companies all over the world. They were still in their intellectual property, and in one manner or another, they would basically sell that information on to local bidders. The second picture beneath that, I refer to him as he who must not be named. This represents the insider threats, or this could be somebody who works for you. They're a disgruntled employee. They steal your information and they try to sell it to a competitor, like this guy went to two of our competitors. And the third sort of images there relate to ransomware, which you've heard a lot about. Again, quick summary. This is where somebody makes your data unreadable, and they will only undo that if you pay them lots of money. And obviously that will impact not just your business, but your customers and your suppliers as well. So on to the next slide, please. So rival states target MOD equipment. We know that. When they do, they're not just targeting the top tier contractor, they are going after the wider supply chain. This includes subcomponents, capability requirements, and training. It can relate to both combat or maintenance, and this is normal daily business. It's not a wartime activity, and it's been going on for over 10 years. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So here we have the National Cybersecurity Strategy that was launched in 2016 by the nation's chief financial officer, and that indicates how important it is. As has been mentioned, it's a tier 1 threat. I like to sort of say it's up there with wars and pandemics. So that gives you a good indication of the sort of impact that can come out from that. And what we're asked to do in that is have an in-depth understanding of the cyber risk. We need to have proportionate protection, and we want our suppliers to government meeting appropriate cyber security standards. And this is part of making the UK the safest place to live and work online. On to the next slide, please. I've done this sort of, I want to say, cheesy diagram. It's common sort of perspective. At the top, we have sort of well-resourced state-sponsored experts that are capable of cracking into anything, and at the bottom, the sort of amateurs that are following a script. I kind of want to say, forget that for a moment. Governments, like many organisations, they will use the cheapest method possible. So if you do not lock your front door, they're not going to employ a safe cracker. They're going to employ the cheapest amateur they can find to break into your house. On to the next slide, please. So now on to the cybersecurity model, and this is our approach to supply chain cybersecurity. So the Defence Cyber Protection Partnership, I like to emphasise the partnership in this, is very much industry-led. You can see there in the diagram, we've got a number of our primes on the group, such as Airbus, Leonardo, Rolls-Royce. It is chaired by BAE Systems. It's done at director level. We do have ADS representing as a sort of membership organisation, and we do have other government departments, including National Cybersecurity Centre, because it would be odd to do this without them, and the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. On to the next slide, please. So what we do in the cybersecurity model, we define what it is we're trying to protect. It's surprisingly, it's not about the sort of end-to-end continuity. It's about mod identifiable information. And I have the definition there. And basically, it's about our capability, our activities, or our personnel that we know we need to protect. So go on to the next slide, please. So again, forget that for a moment. Forget what our requirements are. What I want you to think about is your data, your security, your supply chain. And you'll see how these sort of meet. So onto the cybersecurity model. We start just before we go out to competition with a contract. Our project team, they would do a risk assessment. That generates a cyber risk profile for which you see the usual suspects, very low, moderate and high. Not applicable happens if it's not mod identifiable information. So in the nicest possible way, we don't care. Each of those cyber risk profiles, we have a defense standard that says for this cyber risk profile, we want to see these cyber security controls. And we ask our sort of people that are bidding on the contracts to do the supplier assurance questionnaire. Ideally, they say, yes, we do everything. If they don't, there is a workaround. And that's something I want you to be aware of. And I will come back to that. And then we have a flow down. So where there are subcontracts going on, we will ask the sort of supplier there to do a risk assessment and flow that result down to their contractors. And that ties in with the national cybersecurity strategy. We have the risk assessment because we need to understand the risk. We have these different cyber risk profiles, so it is proportionate protection. It's not a Fort Knox approach to everything. And we want our suppliers meeting minimum standards. So on to the next slide, please. And in a world where we did have an online application, we've got a new one being developed, that information about the supply chain helps us build a map of what's going on. As a little spoiler, our commercial people won't see who the companies are below tier 1, but they will see what the risk is and what's happening about that risk. It also helps us to, if we see multiple companies being targeted by one group, that might identify a particular bit of equipment they're going after. And also, if we see a smaller supplier that's making, just going to make this up, the left phalange for a particular airframe, and then we look a bit closer, we see that they're making the left phalanges for all our airframes, then we're aware that may need a little bit more attention than just what we got in the cybersecurity model. So on to the next slide, please. I'm just going to cover off our risk assessment. As a surprise to many, it asks 6 questions, and that is it. And they're questions that have very definite answers. None of those answers are sort of finger in the air. What did I have for breakfast and take my best guess? They do have specific responses. The first one is there mod identifiable information? Like I said, do we care? And the second one is, will the supplier hold it electronically? Because if they're not holding it electronically, then cybersecurity, from our point of view, in this case, is a bit irrelevant. Questions 3 and 4 are about the classification. It's the usual, is it official, secret, top secret? Question 5 is about personal data, and that's what I call an accelerator. That will ramp up the cyber risk profile. And that's fair, because what you don't want is to be giving away people's personal data to people who aren't prepared to look after it properly. And the last question is about connectivity into our networks. Now I'm going to focus on the very low and the low cyber risk profiles. This is because they're more relevant. They account for about 75% of our contracts, and it's avoiding, I want to say it's avoiding things that are secret and top secret. Most of our work is not done at the secret and top secret levels. And also, if you're part of that flow down, whilst, for example, a submarine might be top secret, a lot of the components won't be. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So for the very low cyber risk profile, what we ask for is cyber essentials. I know that's been mentioned. So straight away, you can sort of see there is a bit of connection. Cyber Essentials, it kind of covers the sort of technical controls that I want to say I would like to think you have at home. You have antivirus, you have a firewall, you update your applications, and if you've got children at home, there's some control that stops your child playing on the computer at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's a control that stops your child installing an application because their friends say it's cool. There is, before you perhaps go down that line, there is a free online tool that IASME, who are the National Cybersecurity Centre's business partner for Cyber Essentials, offer online, and it would just take you through the questions. So that's something I can quite happily signpost people to. So on to the next slide, please. So like I said, we ask people to do a supplier assurance questionnaire. Ideally, they say, yes, I do everything. If you don't, that's actually not a problem. We ask for this cyber implementation plan, and that can come in different styles. It could be, I've got an alternative cybersecurity standard. That's fine. You just tell us how that compares with Cyber Essentials. Most the common one for new SMEs, or I say SMEs that are new to the sort of defense supply chain, they don't have Cyber Essentials. It's not a problem if you can commit to getting Cyber Essentials by the contract start date, i.e. if you win the contract, then go and get Cyber Essentials. I'd like to hope you get Cyber Essentials anyway, but from a defense perspective, that's the time where you must have it. And I highlight again that the Cyber Essentials readiness tool. So on to the next slide, please. So the cyber security requirements for low. This isn't as complicated as it looks. I know there's a lot of items there. We have Cyber Essentials Plus. If I was to say Cyber Essentials is a bit like someone saying, yes, we lock our doors, we close our windows. Cyber Essentials Plus is having someone that goes round and tries your doors, make sure they're locked, tries those little tricks to see if they can get the window latch off and open the window. The other items that are there, they are policies and processes. So if you go on to, and I'm going to say, so for example, we have removable media policy, having a policy that, for example, prevents your staff from putting memory devices into one of your computers, because they can use that to either steal your data, or that memory device could be infected, and that will put a virus straight onto your computers and bypass certain elements of security. So you'll have removable media policy. You may also have a disciplinary process for someone that breaks that policy. So on to the next slide, please. So one of the offerings of the Cyber Resilience Centre is sort of a sort of signpost into the National Cybersecurity Centre's cybersecurity toolkit for boards. And what there's a lot of crossover between what we ask for in those policies and processes and what's on the toolkit. For example, I'm just going to, just for time, pick on the last one. We ask suppliers to define and implement an incident management policy, which must include detection, resolution, and recovery. And in the cyber toolkit, you have, do we have an incident management plan, and how do we ensure it is effective for cyber incidents? And with that, I'm going to say what neither this toolkit does or what we do is mark that plan. That plan is unique to you. What's important is that you have that plan and that you've thought about it. And I really like this, and it's perhaps the first place I would direct people to, rather than Cyber Essentials, because these are the questions that you should be asking yourselves. I can't answer them for you. It's very much how important is this electronic data to your business, never mind what MOD wants. How important is it to you, and what happens when things go wrong? So on to the next slide, please. So this is a little bit of what am I doing here. One of the objectives of our executive group is to improve protection in the defence supply chain of mod identifiable information. I gotta be honest, I sometimes wonder what that means, but taking that a little bit further forwards, we sort of sat down as a team and we've sort of said, well, we think it's going to mean having the right cybersecurity controls, making sure that mod staff are doing the right things, and making sure that our suppliers or potential suppliers are as compliant as they can possibly be. And here's a slight deviation from the exec point of view. They're interested in the supply chain. They want as many companies within the supply chain to be compliant. I'm a little bit different. I want as many companies that are competing to be as cyber compliant as possible. So on to the next slide, please. So it is a bit of a challenge because we do have a lot of SMEs in our supply chain, sort of in the thousands. How do I engage with that many SMEs and increase compliance amongst companies with different contracts without making the cybersecurity model a deterrence? And hopefully you've seen from the very low and the low cybersecurity requirements, what we're asking for is just best practice that's good for you as much as it is for ourselves. And the second part of that is what support can we give when a potential supplier encounters our requirements for the first time. Again, it's impossible for me to do that for thousands of SMEs. It's very difficult for me to do it because I can't do it for people. And who am I going to recommend to help with them? Because I can't promote other sort of profit-making businesses. So on to the next slide, please. So this is where I think the cyber resilience centres are an absolute gift. You've got a police-branded organisation that is set up to support SMEs, micro businesses. They have a free core membership, and in that it includes that sort of signposting, that help with the cyber toolkit, which mostly meets our requirements at the low level. And they also provide that support for getting Cyber Essentials certification. So they are helping you meet our requirements for about 75% of our contracts. And with that, I'm going to say what I quite like as well. They're regional cybersecurity centres, regional partners, and that means using local expertise. So yeah, we talk about meeting the cybersecurity requirements, and I've crossed that out deliberately. Don't do it because it's our requirements. Do it because cybersecurity is about best practice and making yourselves cyber resilient. So on to the next slide, please. And next slide again. So in summary, I'm just going to cover really the cybersecurity model. We have a new contract requirement. We do a risk assessment, 6 questions. That generates a cyber risk profile. We then ask potential bidders to submit a supplier assurance questionnaire. They answer those. We select our supplier, award the contract, and review what's going on. Thank you very much. On to the next slide, please. So we do have a gov.uk webpage if you want to find out about us. It is talking much about our interim process because our online application is down at the moment. And I also have a LinkedIn group as well talking about Defence Cyber Protection Partnership. And the next slide, please, which is the any questions slide. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And actually, while you're there, can you just answer? There's a question in the chat about Cyber Essentials in Scotland. Is it cyber safe? Can you actually do it if you're in Scotland?
Yeah, Cyber Essentials is UK wide.
Fabulous.
And we have in some cases, because we do have contracts overseas, we will ask our suppliers overseas to have Cyber Essentials. I know often the US, for example, will come back and say, hey, we've got something else. We've got this cybersecurity maturity model thing. And we say, well, that's fine. Just tell us if it's equivalent to Cyber Essentials. But yeah, Cyber Essentials is good across the UK.
Brilliant. So we've got some questions in the chat. The first one is to Nick. What priority should I be giving cybersecurity when there are so many other priorities to address?
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I think we're clearly seeing the SME community and the business community in survival mode at this point in time coming out of COVID. So in relation to priorities, you know, how do we frame as a business, how would you look at your traditional protection around security in relation to if you have a fixed location for a business, alarms, and that other side of protection? Because it does need to be a priority. You know, attacks aren't always targeted. They can be absolutely indiscriminate. So just by purely sending out phishing emails en masse, millions of phishing emails, hoping for, one company to take, a small percentage of individuals and companies for clicking on links, and then it leads to the cyber attack. So absolutely high priority. Cyber incidents are increasing year upon year. More businesses being targeted. And around that, if you become, the priorities around that, if you become a victim, the reputational loss, if fines potentially for GDPR, the stress, the impact upon the company, because ultimately, in relation to where your priorities lie, we've talked about cyber essentials a lot, and just by implementing some very, very basic security controls, that can absolutely protect the vast majority of business against the vast majority of attacks. So that is I suppose the really important message. Just engaging with cyber resilience will protect the vast majority of businesses. And I suppose just one final thing, we can listen to this and we can all head for the hills because it sounds like it's the end of the world in relation to potential attacks coming that way, and it's not about pushing out the fear message. The simple measures that organizations can take to protect themselves from the vast majority of attacks, and that trust and confidence is a real key thing in relation to the engagement from the centers, and absolutely push out to the business community, the SME community, to prioritize this, but engage with the centers. We can help them on that journey.
Brilliant. Next question is for Mike. What measures should be in my business continuity plan relating to cyber?
Okay, well, I think we've all hammered this first point home really throughout this presentation. Backups. You definitely need a backup regime in your business continuity planning. So your business continuity is how you maintain critical businesses when something devastating has happened. In the case of a cyber attack, you need access to your client base, your supply chains, and the data that you need to run your business as well. So I go back to what I said right at the start of this presentation. If you take one thing away from my part of the talk today, make sure you've got backups. I've noticed some Q&As coming in, asking questions around it, whether if you're backing up to the cloud, do you need to have a physical backup as well? My answer to that would be, if you've got multiple backups, you're going to be better protected and better able to respond should something go wrong. If something goes wrong with the cloud and you access to that, you've got something else you can rely on too. If you go down that road though, you need to have policies in place about how you're going to keep and retain that data too. So yeah, regards business continuity, focus on your backups.
Brilliant. I was once at a cyber seminar where I said it's not backed up unless it's in at least 3 places. And the other thing they said, if you're using like hard drives, don't actually leave it next to the computer that you've backed everything up to, because if you're broken in, they'd probably pick up the computer and the hard drive at the same time. So it's just all these things that you don't need to think, that you don't think about.
What I'd say too is that the devices you can buy, they've got a shelf life too. So you've got to monitor when you bought it, how it's being stored, as you said. But also crucially as well, don't leave it plugged into your main machine, because if it's connected, then hackers can get into that too. So if you're going to use an external device, make sure you keep it, have a regime, have something written down when you're going to do it, and then put it away from your device somewhere secure, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So next question, with so many, this is for Paul, with so many big companies out there, why would a cyber criminal target my small business? Oh, you're on mute, Paul. The classic.
Yeah, I think that comment has been said more often than any other, hasn't it, over the last year? Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is data is valuable. It doesn't matter the size of the business. All data can be exploited. So, when you talk about businesses, it doesn't matter whether you're piping oil across America or you're holding personal records as a dentist in Colwyn Bay. If there's a vulnerability discovered by the hackers, they're going to look to exploit this. So the difference is when a hacker steals data, whether he deploys ransomware, there's generally a demand for payment. A large company can potentially bring in another specialist company to assist. I was talking to somebody in the industry just a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling me about a demand that came in for £2 million. And the specialist company was charging £400,000 to assist them. Small businesses don't have these resources at their disposal, so they're generally left with having to choose between suffering a privacy breach or a financial loss. And hackers know that the easiest option is often to pay. And I saw some statistics recently that say 1 in 6 businesses do pay. So small businesses, they're generally less prepared. Large companies, they may have their cybersecurity consultant to assess their vulnerabilities. They may have an in-house cybersecurity team to get ahead of these potential threats, but that's not the case generally with SMEs. So without policies in place, SMEs and micro businesses often underestimate the risks associated with handling their data, and that leaves them vulnerable. And coupled with that, most breaches, as has already been mentioned, result of human error. So, coupled with that vulnerability, SMEs are a sort of good target for organised crime.
Brilliant. And one for Hinesh, how will not being prepared for a cyber attack affect my business?
No, that's a really good question, actually. What is the impact on business? And there's a few of them. I mean, the first one is actually just down to cost. If you are subject to an attack, you'll face costs, whether that's immediately at the time, and certainly the case of ransomware, it's paying a ransom, but also afterwards, making sure that your systems are back up and running. That's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of cost, and also then to try and prevent that from happening again. These are all costly endeavours, and all the evidence will show that by spending that cost up front and preventing the attack, it's going to be far more cost effective. But there are other things as well. So, for example, while your business is under attack, actually there's a loss of productivity there. You won't be able to sell things. You won't be able to speak to your clients or customers. That has an impact far wider than just the immediate cost. And there's also the consideration about GDPR. Could there be any future sanctions from the RCO, for example, for any loss of data? There's all these considerations about a cyber attack, and we've spoken about quite a few attacks today, but just try to think slightly wider than where we are. And if you consider things like reputational damage, what would be the impact on your business if your client's information was leaked? What were they buying? Who were they selling to? If that information was on the public domain, how would that make you feel? So please consider the wider impact, of the leakage of your data, where that data is going to. As I said, one of the sort of biggest changes we've seen in the last few years is criminals using the threat of releasing that data as a stick. So just to bear that in mind, as well as the financial cost, there's also a reputational cost as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question that came in about 365 backups. What would we recommend? Does anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, so I did see that question pop up. So I think somebody asked if they're backing up onto 365 or the cloud, is there a need for another type of backup as well? Well, I go back to what I said earlier, that if you've got multiple backups, you are better protected. If one fails, you've got something else to turn to as well. I spoke to an organisation in Carmarthenshire last week, actually, back up to the cloud, but they've actually brought in a policy where they have a physical backup as well. But if you're going to consider that, like I touched on earlier, you have to look about where is that backup being stored, because remembering, of course, there's customer data, sensitive data on there. You'll have to have a policy around where you keep that device as well. A lot of organisations I speak to, small businesses, a lot of them actually are using external devices. There's nothing wrong with using one of those. But as I said earlier, these things have got a shelf life. They've got small parts in there which perish. And it's important to keep a track of when you bought it and make sure you replace them as the time gets on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you could answer the question about Macs as well and ransomware. Are Macs vulnerable to current ransomware?
The short answer is yes, they are. Have we seen the wide-scale ransomware attacks that have taken place on Windows-based computers or Linux-based computers? Probably not. Does that mean that Macs can't be subject to ransomware? The answer is no. They target computers based on what businesses are using, and in the main, still, the large demographic of business users use Windows. They use Linux. They use Windows, and that's why the criminals are targeting them. But by no stretch of the imagination does that mean that Macs are impervious to these attacks. So please don't think that you're safe because you've got a Mac. I've got a Mac too, but I certainly don't think I'm completely 100% safe.
There's a question here for Danielle. How does a privately owned cybersecurity business best complement and work in partnership with these national bodies to reduce national cyber risk?
Thanks, Holly. So I would ask John to get in contact. So we would have a discussion in terms of where you are, what you're doing, and what you've currently got in place. And we would look around, working together around, cyber resilience, and again, helping national bodies reduce the national cyber risk. So I can kind of put my details in the chat, or I can get the FSB to pass them on to you. But let's have a chat, see what you're doing, and see if we can indeed work together, because ultimately, as a whole, the cyber resilience centres do want to make the UK a more cyber resilient place, and we can't do it without your help.
Excellent. And maybe one for Nick. There was a question here about backup solutions, but what about attempting to restore from backups? Is there any sort of advice around that?
Yeah, so I suppose it ultimately depends on what your skill levels are within your organization. So ultimately, we have with us, if it's a case of, you have the skills and abilities to complete the process yourself, absolutely, you can do that yourself. But what we see is a lot of the vast majority of SMEs lack those technical skills. So if you need support in those areas, the best way is to engage experienced advice and support and do that. And I suppose it goes back to the point of that trusted starting point. If you're then looking for where to start to seek support and engagement, the centres provide a range of support. So that could be bespoke support using students. So we have the student service delivery who are supervised by senior practitioners in the delivery of all the services, depending what your needs are. So you can engage with specific needs, and the students supervised by practitioners can support you on that process. And if it's in a situation whereby you're an organization that we can't assist with, we have a diversion path through our trusted partners to get the specific support that you need. So it really depends on your skills and abilities. But what I'll say is get in touch with your regional centre if you have any challenges, and we can put you on that pathway.
Brilliant. I don't know whether Paul, maybe you could help with this one about accounting and Sage. So obviously with making tax digital, there's a massive push to try and get everyone's stuff up in the cloud. But how can we ensure that kind of data is protected?
I think for me, you need to sort of review the data handling policies of Sage, understand how they store your data, where they store your data, and what measures they've got in place. So certainly review that. You mentioned that you're using a drive to back up your data. Yeah, that's very good. But what if that drive fails? Is what I'd say. So you can get things called RAID systems where there's multiple drives. So if one fails, you retain your data. But that's just a consideration if you sort of continue down the route of just storing on a hard drive.
Fab, I've actually got a question that I'd love to know the answer to. Is there any kind of systems that people would recommend to proactively monitor your networks and can actually tell you whether someone's trying to do an attack on you in real time? Because I spent a lot of time researching this, and all the different systems I found were kind of how to close the door afterwards, after it's already happened. Does anyone have any recommendations for that scenario?
Come on, Holly.
Yeah,
Nick, do you want to go first?
Go on, boss.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Hinesh will come. So we have the police cyber alarm. So that's a program supported by the NPCC and available to support all SMEs across all the regions in and around Wales. So the police cyber alarm, we've worked in conjunction with a private sector cybersecurity company to have a system which monitors the external traffic touching the firewalls with various nodes. So essentially what it does is it captures that traffic, that suspicious traffic that we never see, where suspicious activity is essentially rattling the doors of your company via the firewalls. So it monitors the external firewalls and it captures that suspicious activity, and then it pushes that into a data center where there's no personal data that's captured. It's purely the IPs of the suspicious traffic, and then we can collate that and provide the organizations with that threat activity that's being targeted in their business. I'll pass to Hinesh.
Yeah, Hinesh, what you think you're going to come in as well?
I would have done, but Mr. Bell's taken the words right out of my mouth. It was to talk about police cyber alarm. Just to mention, really good tool. It's absolutely free as well. So give us a shout and we can get you signed up to that. It's a really easy win for small businesses. That's all.
Amazing. This is another question for me. So we've done IASME and we've done Cyber Essentials, but I'm still finding that companies that we're working with are then sending us their own security questionnaires, which are basically like a cake type thing. How do we kind of respond to that if we've already gone through doing Cyber Essentials? I don't know who wants to take that one.
Yeah, I don't mind coming in there. I think, yeah, there's lots of different sort of security certifications out there that many sort of companies are looking to sort of get people to take up. For me, if you've got Cyber Essentials Plus, I mean, that's backed by the National Cybersecurity Centre. And that's what I would be pushing back on, saying, you know, we've got something that's nationally recognised here in place. And that would be my response, really.
Excellent.
Just further,
Yeah,
sorry,
of course.
further to that, Holly. I was just going to say, sorry, Phil, just really quickly, you know, we talked about that consistent message before, and you know, that really comes to the point about, you know, there's lots of offers from various organisations, but really, you know, the NCSC as the, you know, national lead for the government are trying to simplify the message, and you know, absolutely Cyber Essentials is the way to go. Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, no, it's all right. So just referring back to my presentation, from our view, Cyber Essentials is largely about the technical controls. The UK has sort of, I want to say, a holistic approach. So there are, I said, when you look at the cyber toolkit, that's less about technical controls. That's more about, you know, what are your policies, your processes. For example, the question about, you know, restoring backed up data takes a long time. So how do you know what data you're going to prioritize in restoring? Do you have a plan? Do you have something that says, you know, don't restore the managing director's stuff, restore first the stuff that the person on the shop floor needs to in order to fill sort of customer orders. And just sort of in that sort of comparison factor, I said we have a cyber implementation plan. So we don't, if you've got a different standard, it's about telling us how that standard meets the requirements of Cyber Essentials. We're not going to know every standard out there. You can't just say, well, we've got ISO 27001 and therefore that's equivalent. Well, it might be, it might not be. Things like scope, and I couldn't really tell you all the details on that. But that's why we have a sort of a form where you go through and say, yes, this is equivalent because it covers what Cyber Essentials is asking for.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists and people who've answered the questions. I think we've covered a lot of ground there. So if you missed the start of this, you'll be able to catch it on the FSB website under the replays. And again, if you want to talk to any of the people, we can put you in their direction as well. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you for the panelists, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you.